All right. Hey, I want to thank everybody for logging into this Zoom meeting, and particularly all of our different panelists. Yeah, it looks this is kind of an exciting topic. I recently I read somewhere that the Government Accountability Office, the federal GAO, did some analysis saying that when the average rent goes up by $100 per month, the homelessness will go up by 9% in the area where that happened. And I think that there are actually price points where that's more true than others, where if the average rent goes up above like half of the average SSDI payment, then there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be severely rent burdened and a risk of becoming homeless. People, disabilities, getting SSDI, I think the average payment is just over $1,500 a month. And so we've actually reached a point where, in the last 5 years, where the number of apartments that are affordable to people in SSDI has gone down markedly in Utah, and particularly in Salt Lake County and parts of Utah County. And so, anything that we can do to make it easier to increase the stock of deeply affordable housing is important. As I was preparing for this particular conversation, I thought about there was a person who let 15 homeless people camp in his front yard last year in Salt Lake City. And I thought, well, what if instead of, the city telling them that's something you can't do, the city had instead said, hey, how'd you like to set up an ADU? We have a program to help you do that. That would have been a different thing. But we have some amazing experts, people with really different perspectives. And so I'm going to stop talking, except for to say two things. One, Crossroads is putting together our annual Crossroads Urban Center, where I work, is putting together, and I should introduce myself. My name is Bill Tibbetts. I am the Deputy Executive Director of Crossroads Urban Center, and also the staff person for the Coalition of Religious Communities, which brings people together from faith communities that support our 2 food pantries and thrift store to work on policy issues that cause people to become hungry and homeless, in the hopes that there will be less need for our food pantry and thrift store. So that's who we are. That's what this meeting is for. And Crossroads has an annual poverty summit. We haven't been able to do for 2 years, but we're bringing it back this year at Christ United Methodist Church in Mill Creek on August 27th, which is a Saturday. Registration will start at 8:30. It's free. There'll be a light breakfast during registration. There'll be a free lunch at the end. And the big question we'll be looking at is, what would it take in Salt Lake County to build all of the housing that has been identified by the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness before Salt Lake City hosts the Olympic Games again in 2034, assuming that we actually do that. That last year, the coalition identified 2,940 with were needed to meet the current need for housing. With ARPA money that from the state and county government, there's significant investment in getting started toward building those 2,940 units. But there's, if we stop there, we are not really going to solve homelessness. So that's the big topic. We actually have representatives from 2 cities in Salt Lake City, the county government, and the governor's office coming. And so that's there's more details about that in the link I shared in the chat. But that's definitely something worth coming to. The other thing I wanted to announce is that our next meeting for this group, the Coalition of Religious Communities, is actually going to be on September 14th, and we're going to be focused on 2 things. our annual diaper drive for homeless kids that we do in October. So churches and other faith communities participating in that, we'll coordinate how we want to do things this year. And then also talk a bit about the legislative session. I was thinking we've done a lot of different things during the legislative session. I thought this year it might be interesting to see if individual congregations would like to go up and have a day where they do a tour as small groups as congregations. That's an idea. We'll be talking about that next month. So that I think I found a really long-winded way to say all that. I'm sorry. Again, this is a conversation today is about adding tiny homes and accessory dwelling units to people's backyards, to churches, making it easier for people to do that. If it costs $150,000 or $200,000 to add a tiny home to your backyard, there are less people who will do so. And so, we're looking at models from other places on how to make that more affordable. I thought that it would be great to start off this conversation with somebody. The reason I thought it would be good to talk to her is one of the models that we've found in an article from Shelter Force is in Minnesota. They have a program where if a homeowner agrees to have an accessory dwelling unit in their backyard and to rent it to somebody with a Section 8 voucher for 10 years, that unit will be built for free. And so for somebody like the person who wanted to let homeless people sleep in his front yard, if there was a program where you could have free ADU stuck in his yard and do the same purpose, maybe for less people, that could have been really appealing. So I thought if we're going to talk about Section 8 vouchers, it makes sense to have people from a housing authority come. And so I invited Andy, who is the director of the Weber Housing Authority. And are you still the director of the Utah NARO, which is sort of brings together the different housing authorities?
I'm the former chair.
Okay. Well, then so you had some things you wanted to share with us, so I'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, I'll start. Bill had asked me to talk about permanent supportive housing and the increasing difficulties that we're having finding landlords to partner with us with our supportive housing project. So the Weber Housing Authority administers a permanent supportive housing program, which is rental assistance linked with case management. And it's a scattered site model, so we partner with landlords on the open market. This is a very high risk, but also high barrier population. So they are individuals that are chronically homeless and disabled and are very hard to get housed. Usually they have evictions on their record, they have criminal histories. And so it's becoming harder and harder for us to find landlords that are willing to work with this population. So I'd like to introduce my dear friend Caleb. He approached me. He was a student at Weber State University, and he was doing, for one of his classes, he was doing some research and on accessory dwelling unit. Well, it's a type of accessory dwelling unit, and he brought it to the Housing Authority probably, I don't even know, maybe 6 months ago or so. And then since then, we've started to try and pan out how we can make this happen in our community. So I'm just going to share with you really quickly what this looks like. So this is, and tell me if you can see my screen, give me a thumbs up. So this is a basic model of what we're looking at. So just a very teeny tiny, and Caleb, jump in if you hear me say anything incorrect or want to add anything, but just a small units, about 600 square feet, with all of the necessary components of an ADU, only smaller. And then how this program works, I'm going to share kind of some pictures from the project that we're looking to incorporate in Weber County from their website. And then, so tell me if you can see my screen. Oh, Actually, give me 1 second. So, but how the program works is the Housing Authority, can you see my screen? So how it would work is the Housing Authority would contract with private homeowners, and we would build a cement pad on their property, and then they would host a homeless individual. So we would have to pair the host, the homeless individual with the host family, and then they would act as a community support. So they could help with things like grocery shopping or help with things like community involvement. Not necessarily provide case management. We would still provide case management and supports, but just help the homeless individual learn how to assimilate into that community. I'm just going to flip through these pictures so you can kind of see they're so tiny. They're just very little, which the project, and so this is called the Block Project. It's in Seattle. And they said that they don't have any, one of the biggest issues that we have on our permanent supportive housing program is unauthorized guests. They said because of the size of the unit, they don't have any issues with that. And then it's a community project. So these are collapsible units, so they can take the unit down if the host family, asks they no longer want to participate. They can take it down, they can move it to another location, but they said they haven't had to do that. They said since they've been running the program that it's been so successful that they haven't had any hosts asked to be removed from the program. So the agency, so what we're hoping to do in Weber County is we're hoping to do a partnership with Weber State University and then with our tech college to build these units. And then we are hoping to coordinate with the community to find host families and then partner with the Lantern House to refer homeless households to the program. Caleb, anything you want to add on the program itself?
Maybe I'll just chime in. You guys, as congregation leaders, probably already know how important community is for helping individuals, right? And so I think that's one thing that often is problematic in many ways we approach helping individuals experiencing homelessness, is it's kind of like we just help them, and maybe it's a case manager helping them, but there's not a community effort to kind of include them and take care of their needs and do that. And so this model is really cool because it incorporates community into the healing process and the growth process for these individuals.
Yeah, so we're in the very early stages of incorporating this, but it is similar to an the ADU model. We're really excited about it, and we hope to be back in a year saying how successful the project is.
Well, that's awesome. That's really creative, and it just happens. I had no idea you were doing that when I invited you to participate. So that's really exciting. I guess one question I would have is this something, if there were a congregation that had some extra space on their property, or how many parking spots in a church parking lot would you have to fill to add one of these? I'm just like thinking, not.
So one of let me jump in really quick, because one of the biggest issues that we're going to have with this is ADU zoning requirements and getting political buy-in for this. And so I don't know if it's necessarily a space issue, but we're going to have to find out what exactly we can and can't do with our ADU units in each jurisdiction. So and I think that we've come a long way with ADU legislation and what we can and can't do, but I think that's still going to be our biggest issue. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be how many can we fit in one parking lot. It's going to be how we go about that, and make sure that we're following policy.
Good. Yeah, that's a fair answer. There's someone raising a hand, and I should say, I think, why don't we go through it? Because I invited a bunch of people to talk about different things, and somebody might answer your question. So we'll take questions after after everybody's done presenting, if that's okay. Sorry. So our next presenter is actually Reverend Kimal James, who Reverend Kim James, who is actually is the minister for First United Methodist Church in Ogden, and I think she is somebody who's thought a bit about including housing on church property, and I think the reason I thought she might have something interesting to say about this is I don't think, I mean, churches have budgets, and being able, you can have a giant heart, but if you have to choose between fixing the roof on the place where you worship on Sundays and doing something new, the roof tends to take the priority for the people in the congregation. So I guess, do you think that there would be churches, I mean, you've worked with a lot of different churches, do you think that congregations would be more interested in doing something like this if there was a way that they could do it at a lower cost, or even for free, because as a mission, as part of the church's mission?
Sure, Bill, thanks for asking me to do this. Just let me start with a little background. In 2019, I had a grant where I was able to do a lot of research, and my focus at that time was on the idea of building an assisted living facility on our church property. And so because I was focused on an older population with particular needs, that was what I was doing. But while I was doing that research, I also went to the University of Indiana, where they were doing a really short little workshop-y kind of class on Minka houses. I don't know if Caleb's ever heard of that, or Andrea, but they're small houses. They're not as small as the model you just showed us, but they're designed for people with various kind of disability needs, so they're wheelchair accessible and all that. And I did put some thought into that. I talked to a housing authority in Loveland, Colorado, that was putting in a whole community of these small Minka houses, and that was for a senior population, but they were able to live independently in their own house. And so, yeah, I have thought about this, and the biggest, well, there were a number of problems with my project idea, but one of the biggest ones was that in the end, my own congregation members said, we could not afford to live in this place that you're talking about building. And so it was going to go nowhere if they couldn't even imagine themselves living in it. So yes, Bill, what you're saying about affordability is a huge factor. My church currently is paying $5,000 a month on our church mortgage. I mean, we can't afford to do anything else. We can barely afford our own mortgage. But we do have an 11-acre property, and we're not using most of that except to grow alfalfa or other kind of grass pasture land. So yeah, I've been very curious about the idea of, could we put a little housing village? It's First United Methodist Church of Ogden, but since 2008, we've lived in the, we've located in the suburb of Marriott-Slaterville, which is a more agricultural suburb of Ogden. The acreages are large here, and the bus stop is pretty far away. And so, you know, we're not really accessible easily to the services that a needy population might require. But I've always been curious, you know, if Andrea and I could get together and talk, or Caleb, and say, you know, if there was a possibility of putting some kind of little houses on our land, would the people be able to get access to the services, or would the services come to them? How would transportation work? You know, there's a lot of questions that would need to be satisfied, but my church property is just within visual sight of the BDO where a lot of people work, 7,000 people work over there. So I would think that if anybody's able to work, they could get a job very close by. If we're talking about people that are not able to work, then they need other kind of helps. I'm curious about like plumbing and electrical. If you plop a little house into somebody's backyard, I assume you hook it up to their house's utilities. If you plop some houses into my churchyard, you just put a pipe from the church bathroom out there. I mean, how does that work? I'm curious about how that would work. But yeah, basically, to get back to Bill's primary question to me is, do churches have money to do this? No, probably not. Most churches that I'm acquainted with are in decline. Most churches don't have a lot of money. And honestly, another factor is most churches, because the congregation population is aging, we may not have the human resource volunteer capacity to manage all those details. And so it might be that if we were to put 5 or 10 little houses on our church property, we would probably have to have a management company manage it for us, honestly, because I don't think that within my congregation, we would have the human resource ability to manage that. So did I cover what you needed, Bill?
I think that was brilliant. I think those are all the kinds of details that can be worked out if there's a will. But those are, I mean, and actually there were a couple of people who asked about the plumbing question, because I think, it does make a difference. I mean, I assume that there would be plumbing. Is that where?
Can I jump in, Bill?
Please do.
Yes, so the homes would be plumbed to, it would just be connected to the current utilities of the property. So Reverend Kim, we would provide the unit itself. We would just partner with you on the land. And I would say, I don't think 10 would be a reasonable number, and I don't think the city would allow something like that. But you could do 1. And we're not looking for funding. We're just looking for that wraparound support that a church could offer to this one individual. And so the hope is that this one individual, we could get them into this place, get them stabilized, and then transition them from that unit to, the open market, and then free up that spot for another individual to come, and then have the church, provide that support to the next person. And so I think the thought of 10 is that's super overwhelming, even to me, but for one individual, for the congregation to provide support to one individual might be a little more doable.
It's always easier to start with 1.
Phil, can I ask a question here? So would somebody please define the difference between permanent supportive housing and transitional housing? Because I thought, Andrew, you were just talking about transitional.
No, this would be permanent housing. So transitional housing is just temporary housing. So it's up to 2 years. So it's 6 months to 2 years. And then they have to be out by that 2-year time period. Permanent supportive housing is for as long as the individual needs the support. So the rental assistance linked with case management.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. For transitional housing has a time limit. Permanent supportive housing doesn't have a time limit, but people move out of permanent supportive housing into housing without all the supports all the time. Because sometimes there are people, they have disabling conditions, they will never be able to live in an apartment of their own coming straight off the street. They'll have problems. But after they've lived there for 2 years, and maybe qualified for SSDI or SSI, they have a way to pay for rent. And with the Section 8 voucher, they can move into a place and have a higher level of independence. and that happens. That's so actually I'm really I should mention there is a church, another United Methodist Church, Hilltop United Methodist Church, that bought a house for a different purpose. And when they couldn't use it that way, it is now being used as housing for a refugee family who was actually placed there through Family Promise. And so this church was already part of Family Promise, which sets it up so that families experiencing homelessness, families with kids experiencing homelessness, are hosted at different churches. And so every 2 weeks they're moved from one church to another. And but the goal with that program is always to place people in housing. Hilltop United Methodist Church now has a refugee family that came out of Family Promise, living in a house that is on their property. So I think, I mean, when I say this is something that churches would be willing to do. I mean, when they have the opportunity, they do it. So I not at least some of them. So our next person is actually somebody who was part of an effort to add tiny homes to a property and was shut down by zoning rules. So I want our Kesnia from Nomad Alliance is going to talk. I'm going to share a couple news articles about their efforts while she talks.
Hi, my name is Ksenia Knyazova, and I'm the executive director of a new nonprofit, Quasi New. It's about a year and a half old, and we do everything. We began with providing supplies, filling the basis needs of Maslow's hierarchy with clothing and food and blankets. Now we've also provided hot showers and haircuts. And we've also had an empowerment workshop program. We have a mass DMV appointment program, getting people IDs. And then we have housed 25 people from about April of last year of 21 to about February of this year, from one night to almost a year, in micro shelters in backyards across Salt Lake County. So we've done this, and we've done this with great success. Some of the most notable successes is we were an organization that was a little laissez-faire about people's addictions. We said, please do not use drugs on the property. Please, respect the space. But we're not going to search your things. We're not going to come into your home, because I do believe in agency for all people. And within about 4 months, one woman who was an injected drug user multiple times a day, she realized that she no longer liked the way meth made her feel, and she would go months without using it. And across the board, all the people that lived with us, they decreased their usage about 80%, if not gotten clean off of meth and heroin entirely. Also, these were, we own 3 micro houses, and they are cheap. Our first was $300, second was $250, and the third was $100. And this is something, I mean, they're podunk. There is no sewage, there is lighting, there is heat, but they're plugged into the main house, the electric grid, but they were able to use the bathrooms inside the main house. So our plan is hopefully to continue this program. Murray City caught wind of our illegal housing, and so they forced us to evict everyone and close the program, primarily because of permitting and because they weren't hooked up to sewage, even though we told them, look, they have bathrooms inside, there's an outdoor kitchen, there's an indoor kitchen, we cook together, there's heating, everything. The people that living on the streets under tarps and tents, they don't have sewage either. So how is this a better solution to evict these people so they're back out on the streets when they had stability, they had a safe place for their things. I was checking in with them constantly, giving them everything from rides to food, cooking for them, cleaning for them. getting them IDs, supporting them in their detox efforts, giving them detox kits with vitamins and supplements and snacks so that they can transition away from those more nefarious drugs. So we've done it. And we've been in communication with the Salt Lake Valley Coalition on Homelessness, Gene Welch Hill. We had a big panel conversation about how do we create a sanctioned campground that could be a mixed use space with uniform tents, as well as motorhomes and campers, as well as micro houses somewhere in the city. And we were told by Gene Welch Hill that the VOA and the Road Home don't have because of a labor shortage, they don't have the capacity to execute and manage a sanctioned campground, but we do as the Nomad Alliance. So Reverend, if you are open, all we're looking for right now is land. We can get the funding to build the tiny structures. We already have 3. As far as sewage goes, our idea is to create, we want to create a whole fully mobile system. Because there is precedent in King County, Washington, the way that they do their sanctioned campgrounds is revolving every 6 months. The sanctioned campground moves from church parking lot to church parking lot, so there is no undue pressure on one neighborhood to house people permanently. And so we would create a composter on a mobile platform, and it's a composting toilet that's been, it's kind of a brand new technology. It's been used in festivals in Europe, a little bit here, and it cost about $3,000 to build. And the great thing about the waste is that it, because of the way that the system is structured, it's completely compost. It turns into compost that is clean and can be used in your garden. So we would do that. We would do solar panels. We can cart in water if necessary. The water would be really beneficial to have on the property. And we've done it. We've housed 25 people. At one point we had 6 people in one property, in 2 micro houses, in a garage, in a sauna I was building that was still under construction. And there were 2 veterans, a mother and her 7-year-old little daughter that we found living under an overpass, a woman that was escaping domestic violence, that girl that I told you about who came off meth after some time. And then I stayed there sometimes as well. So, and the great thing is we learned how to house people with different pathologies, with different triggers, strangers, and people got along. And I went back to the first neighborhood where we housed these people. It's called the Secret Garden. And I interviewed the neighbors, and we never quite told the neighbors that there was going to be unsheltered people living there. We did it a little bit illegally, a little hush hush, told that our tenants, please stay out of sight. Please don't make any noise. Please, keep this quiet, because this is all we wanted to do is prove that it can work. And we did it illegally, but we did prove that it can work. And we did it with very, very little funding, if any at all. And the neighbors actually said that there was no crime increase in the neighborhood, that that nothing got stolen, that there was no, noise or anything that disturbed their neighborhood. And one, the closest neighbor that I did an interview said, we miss them. The house looks really sad and dilapidated with nobody living there. We would invite them back at any time. They were very conscientious. They did their thing. They allowed us to do our thing and have our own music, and they didn't complain. And the great thing about this community is it was in Rose Park. So the neighbors really were kind of, see no evil, hear no evil. We don't talk about it. We kind of let people do their own thing and with agency. And so we were able to keep that going for a really long time until that property was put on the market. So as far as the only thing really right now that we're really needing in order to execute is land. And in this roundtable that had Jeff Silvestrini, the Mill Creek mayor, had council people, we had a state representative, people from the VOA and the Road Home. They were all supportive of our efforts. The problem is at this point is zoning. So which is why partnering with a church is probably the best option. And it has been the best option for a lot of sanctioned campgrounds in the nation. because of the exemptions, religious exemptions to zoning laws that kind of allow churches to house people. And there are, there, like as Bill said, there is a church that is housing and giving people asylum. So if we wanted to, the other hurdle is if a church doesn't come forward, we would have to work on zoning restrictions. I know that Mayor Mendenhall is completely against any sort of sanctioned housing or housing people of this type. I know that there is a tiny house community by the Other Side community or the Other Side Village that is being seen as a panacea for this problem. And I don't think that the city is exploring other options right now. My big qualm with the Other Side Village is that it is, I believe it's too high barrier. With the reality of the people that we work with the chronically unsheltered, the people that live in the streets that are shelter averse. They have really, really long held addiction issues and mental health issues that are really difficult to let go of immediately. And the Other Side Village, I think, is unrealistic and expecting people to stay completely clean. And I'm afraid that because relapse is very often happens all the time, that it'll become a revolving door of people having the hope, making it, being sober for a few weeks and then relapsing and being kicked out. So I hope that we can create something much more low barrier where, there is no drug use allowed on the property, but we do not penalize people for their addictions, for their mental health woes, for their relapses. What I found was notable is in Santa Cruz, they changed their code ordinances to allow private property to house people in micro houses up to, so in the yard of a residence with the consent of the owner, with camping in the side yard or the backyard, inside of a licensed and registered motor vehicle in a parking lot on the side of a religious institution, and no more than 6 vehicles inside of a motor vehicle in a business institution, and a residential off-street driveway with the consent of the owner. And if, but the problem is the city, Salt Lake City is really the hub of the vast majority of the chronically unsheltered, primarily because of the offered. And I know that the mayor is against it, but we did have Alejandro Puy, a councilman, come to our last supply drive and participate in these speed chats, as well as Representative Benyon. And Alejandro Puy is completely in favor of pushing the council to really look into campgrounds as the option. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I think you did a really good job of showing that if a problem like the one Andrea was talking about in Weber County were to be started in Salt Lake County, if the Salt Lake County Housing Authority or the Salt Lake City Housing Authority were to take that model and bring it down here, that there would be people who participate. And I think that that's actually really exciting. I think the thing though is that Andrea's, the model from Weber County is specifically for people who are chronically homeless. I think this model of adding tiny homes to church property or to backyards, and I mean, which is the true, yes, in my backyard, I'm adding affordable housing to my backyard, but it's also, I mean, there's an organization in San Diego that calls itself Yes in God's Backyard, because they, and they've done an inventory of available churches that they could have in the San Diego area where they could add units like this, I think, I think this model can extend beyond just creating housing for people who are currently homeless, to homelessness prevention, because I was talking at the beginning about how every time the median rent goes up $100, you have an increase in homelessness of 9%. If you have somebody who's been able to live in the same apartment for 20 years, but the rent finally goes up to where they can't afford it, and they look around and there's nothing they can afford because their their SSDI check is $1,500 a month, and it's hard to find an apartment for less than $1,200. That situation, I mean, having tiny homes that are specifically made to be affordable housing could help to fill that gap. And so I actually invited Taylor Anderson because he is a very vocal yes in my backyard person from the Salt Lake City area. And I thought, I was wondering, if people who like density, like inclusive cities, would be more open to adding an accessory dwelling unit to their property if there were models for doing it that could reduce the cost. It's if you can add something to your backyard for $50,000, it's a different thing than if it costs $150,000, right? I think we're actually in an interesting time in terms of reducing costs, because with the Other Side Village that was talked about earlier, you have a very cost-conscious nonprofit looking into alternative technologies for building tiny homes. Can we use manufactured housing? Can we do 3D printing? What can we do to make the tiny homes for as cheap as possible? And so I think part of the conversation where it starts getting technical is, if I wanted to add a tiny home to my backyard at the save cost by having it built by a 3D printer, would the city permit that? Right? That gets into, but I think that Taylor adds, and I would say, I think that actually I share some of Kesnia's concerns about the Other Side Village, that it won't work for everyone, but I would say that there are enough people coming out with serious mental illness, coming out of treatment with nowhere to go, coming out of jail with nowhere to go, that there will be people who will want to move into housing with a strong recovery focus, like what they're talking about. I think that it's a niche and it will be filled. That's my thing. Is I think and it's just that what you're talking about is that there are a lot of people who won't fit in that niche, right?
I'm sorry to interrupt. In Seattle and in Washington, there are tiny houses that are basically have the exact same rules, tiny house communities, as the Other Side Village, and they're sitting mostly empty.
Okay. Well, then maybe I'm wrong. I think
because it may serve the people that are already in the shelter system and follow the rules, but it won't do. I don't think it'll do much to dramatically decrease the chronically unsheltered population that is visible in downtown that are on the street. Okay. And community, I think, is really concerned about the decrease in people coming downtown because they are afraid of this community. So if the city thinks that this will decrease the visibility of the homeless, I just have qualms at it. It will serve the people already in the shelter system. It will serve people that can, keep to the rules, as egregious of mental health issues, that don't have as egregious of addiction issues. But who knows? I am optimistic, and I'm glad that there is a solution, and this will help a certain percentage of the population. I'm just not sure if it'll help the people that they really intend.
Okay, so Taylor, I started introducing you. Do I need to start again, or are you ready to go?
I'm good to go. Yeah, I thank you for including me on this panel. We're talking about so many different rungs on the ladder of housing, and it's really interesting, some of the models that that I'm learning about just being here today. So thanks for putting it on. Such an important conversation. I guess I represent the kind of independent homeowner side of things that, yeah, like Bill said, I'm interested in kind of, I don't want to say altruist, because I just want to live in a community that's more walkable, that has houses for people to live in, that is, I guess giving back, and the way that you were describing it, Bill, tiny homes. I mean, Salt Lake City has started a conversation around accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Could be a tiny home, could be attached to your house, could be detached, could be a retrofitted garage. And the nice thing is that we have already re-legalized them in Salt Lake City in all shapes and sizes. Well, not all sizes, but in a number of different shapes and a number of different sizes. The state actually did a pretty big thing and passed a law that allows any homeowner to add an ADU inside their house without a city preventing that from happening. So we are moving in the right direction from adding this rung on the ladder, which would be maybe 80% AMI, somebody making 80% of the median income or less. These housing types, ADUs, are inherently more affordable than a new single family house being added, or a new apartment complex is going to charge market rate rents. ADUs are just kind of a different animal. They have a different relationship between the homeowner and the renter. It's more, it's intimate. You know each other. You're not going to turn the screws like an investor-owned property might, because inherently they need to make more money this year than they did last. So there's just a number of different things. And then I guess what we've kind of circled around, and what Kesnia's kind of example highlighted is, and we've talked about density a little bit. I like to kind of think of the form of the buildings, because a lot of the backlash against adding more houses to a neighborhood is against the form and the fear that a single family neighborhood is going to be just transformed into just, high rises and just something that looks and feels totally different than it was when we moved in. ADUs and other types of kind of missing middle housing is just, it fits the scale of what's there today. And so my neighbors might not even know if I add an ADU. I think there's only one ADU on my block. That's the one I know of, but there may be more that I'm not even aware of. That's the beauty of these things. They just blend into the neighborhood, and they immediately add more housing stock that is inherently more affordable, that can then give opportunity to people who otherwise might not be able to afford living on this block a chance to live there. And there's other downstream effects, positive downstream effects about supporting local businesses and creating kind of more connections in the neighborhood that come from that. So I just see ADUs as just a potential huge benefit to any neighborhood, really. The one problem from my perspective is paying for it. And I've been searching for different outlets, different lenders, different loan types that could facilitate me building one on my property. Up until a couple months ago, I think the main way that Salt Lakers could get this done is through the tremendous equity that anyone that's been fortunate to own a house has gained over the past couple of years. Now that has kind of shifted, because you're not going to refi your house and get that equity to build a new property at a 6% interest rate. It's just changed so much. So it's not an option right now. Some cities like LA, some other markets, they have, because ADUs are now being legalized, the lending industry is coming in and saying, okay, we'll own a portion of that rent and you can pay us back over time. We'll just collect that, and it's going to even out over time. I'm not aware of any of those options in Salt Lake City right now, but those are the types of things that might happen as the market kind of adjusts to them being even legal for the first time in potentially ever. Anyways, let me stop the word vomit there. If there were ways to add it more affordably, if there were ways for the city to potentially waive fees, or find other ways to just, eliminate fees, lower the cost of people adding ADUs to their backyards, we would see positive effects, I think.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, all of you. I think there were things I heard that I had no idea I was going to hear today. And so this has been a pretty remarkable conversation. There are a bunch of people who are attending does anybody have a question for a panelist they didn't ask in chat, or that they'd like to ask out loud? I'm here. I see one hand up. Ben.
Unmute here. Do you need video? Not necessary.
Ah.
My name is Ben Tecumseh DeSoto. I'm returning to working with the Utah Investigative Journalism Project. I have a career as staff photographer at the Houston Chronicle for 25 years. Around that, I have a body of work spanning from 1980 up through the pandemic, dealing with homelessness, the coalition. I basically documented in 2014, 2016, their success story when they first had their first drop in numbers. And so I have the mechanics, and my prayer is that I've recognized in my work is that it's just, we were dealing with a problem that's 150 years old, 7-generation old, affordable housing, access to medical care, and a just justice system. And so I particularly are asking the panelists, are they familiar with the Community First Village in Austin, Texas, and its history in detail? Oh, okay. So do you know that the VA in Los Angeles, they have tiny houses, campus on their VA property? Okay. So again, there's a lot of working models, the sanctioned campsites in Austin. The Deseret Industries did a great profile, both of the Deseret of the Community First Village and the sanctioned campgrounds in Austin, reporting earlier this year. Okay. I was the photographs that ran last month of the abatement that ran on the front page of the Tribune. Those were my photographs and Eric Peterson's reporting. And so are you guys familiar with the report that was released to the legislature in 2020 from the Gardner Policy Institute Policy Center about homelessness?
I am.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? It basically profiles what the problem is and the 6 working solutions to bring it up into a solution models. Is that generally communicated to the public that the legislature has a blueprint and that we're trying to get the public engaged into this public process? So you see, there's a lot of solutions out there, and we need to kind of galvanize, arm the choir, so to speak, that there's solutions. We don't have to embrace these rules. Wonderful article, I guess about 4 weeks ago in Salt Lake Weekly Tribune, Salt Lake City Weekly, about the street fight, about the stranglehold of single family residences, and that's how we're not able to make changes because of the arbitrary rules that benefit a certain segment of our population. And Mr. Anderson, the downside is that without any kind of controls like they put down in Moab for residential houses for residents, a lot of people are building those small houses and renting them out as Airbnbs instead of trying to meet the need. So again, rules can divine is in the detail. These rules can save us, or these rules can condemn us to perpetuating a 150-year-old problem.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And it really is about political will and about agreeing to move forward. I think, that's why with our poverty summit that we're doing on August 27th at Christ United Methodist Church, we are talking not just about the 2,940 units the Salt Lake Valley Coalition to End Homelessness has identified as being needed to meet the current need, but actually talking about what it would take to build those units, before 2034, when we're trying to host the Olympic Games again in Salt Lake County. I think, it's depressing to say, can we get it done by 2030, meet the current need by 2034? But the truth of the matter is that if we don't think about it, we won't get there. If we don't have a plan, if we don't push forward, we will not get there. But if we work assertively, we could be there in 5 years or less. So I think we know that long term housing is the solution to homelessness. We know that housing stability is the solution to preventing homelessness, right? I mean, if you need places where there are tens of thousands of people in Utah who have a fixed income, whose income is SSI, SSDI, Social Security, and the rentals, right? And if all of the apartments that people on those fixed incomes can afford to rent go away or have the prices increase, then we'll see homelessness increase. And so there's a need for housing to move people out of homelessness. There's a need for housing to prevent people from falling into homelessness. And we need to have, it will take a concerted long-term political effort to get there. Ben is absolutely right. It's a problem that's been going on for decades. I think, you know, there was a lot of premature celebration in Salt Lake because I mean, what was sad was that we built a bunch of permanent supportive housing in the Salt Lake area between 2005 and 2010. We stopped building it for 10 years. But in the middle of that, 2014, we decided to say, hey, we've ended chronic homelessness, when actually it was beginning to come back because we'd stopped addressing it. And so the people who celebrated the victory were the people who'd actually let it get, who went on, you know, national television and went and presented to the United Nations about how we'd solved chronic homelessness, were the people who'd actually been complacent as the problem crept back up. So we don't want to, there is historic funding and homelessness coming out of the legislature this year. The county is putting money into housing in a way that they haven't before. But if what we don't want to do is to say, okay, well, we took a big step and then, you know, be complacent as things get worse again. And so it's a long-term problem. We need long-term strategies for dealing with it. I think actually, I'm really excited to hear about what's happening in Weber County because you're further along with making tiny homes part of the solution than I thought that I knew. I mean, and so that's really exciting. So thank you, everyone, all the panelists, all the attendees. Come to our Poverty Summit on August 27th. It really will be, and I mean, I know there are all these people from Weber County on the conversation, and I'm just talking about it's about Salt Lake County, but we're engaging with the state, and any solution that is to scale for Salt Lake County is going to, just because of the way the process works, is going to fund solutions outside Salt Lake County. And we would rather talk about what's needed in Weber County, what's needed in Utah County. I mean, I think that makes, because I also say, I mean, if we did too good a job in Salt Lake County, people from other counties are going to come here, right? And so we need a statewide solution. And so,
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. And I hope to see you all on the 27th. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.